Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Let's do it. Original link to the video, top description. Below that, link to the Discord. Would love to have you. Let's do it. I don't exactly remember where it left off, but I usually he does like a recap kind of, and it always sparks preemptive like. Original link to the video, top of the description. Below that, link to the Discord. Click on it, send you right over there. Would love to have you. And if you are not ready to learn, listen. If you aren't ready to learn, there's the door. You are in the wrong class. Or just sit in the back and chill, that's fine. Let's go.
In October 42 BC, despite Caesarian victories at Phasaelus, Thapsus, Munda, and now Philippi, the Pompeian party still lingered on. In Sicily, Sextus Pompey, one of the sons of Pompey Magnus, was still consolidating his position, gathering refugees from the war to his banners and posing a constant threat to Italy. Meanwhile, in the east, Quintus Labienus, the son of Titus Labienus, had been sent to Parthia by Brutus and Cassius to try and seek their support. After their deaths, Labienus remained in Parthia, and though little had emerged from this so far, the likelihood of a Parthian invasion was seeming more and more likely. The next war, however, did not emerge in either of these areas, but rather in Italy itself. One theme you'll gather is that a certain Lepidus is going to be kept out of the spotlight, and some might say we're not really focusing on what he was doing. Well, the best we can offer is...
Guys, make sure to use the Kings and Generals link, alright? It helps them out.
An update on the Lepidus of Raid Shadow Legends, permanently temporarily down on his luck, Death Knight. The big news is that this much-loved wannabe hero is getting a major upgrade. Or is he? The answer to that question is no, and I'm joined by Death Knight to explore this devastating revelation. Death Knight, is it true that you're not really being buffed, they're just releasing a better character called Ultimate Death Knight?
Ultimate Death Knight? More like Ultimate Dork Knight.
He said, dorkily.
Got him!
Alright, so you know this guy exists, and he's gonna Antony all over your Lepidus.
Yeah, so...
Huh?
You don't know who those people are, do you?
Well...
Okay, you're out. You better watch the rest of the video. And in the meantime, I'll tell everyone else how to get a good version of this guy for free. If you log in and play Raid for 7 days between now and October 27th, you'll get Ultimate Death Knight. But then also use the promo code DKRises to get a load of free items that bring him up to level 50 5-star Ascension instantly. If you don't have the game yet, get it via our link in the description or the QR code on screen to get unique bonuses worth $30. The Epic Champion Ina, 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard to summon new champions right away. All this treasure will be waiting for you here. Following Philippi, the dynamic of the Second Triumvirate changed drastically. As the primary commander, Antony received much of the acclaim, and was thus the most powerful of the trio. Octavian, having participated in some capacity, also received some credit, while Lepidus, having been left behind in Rome, received none. Moreover, the campaign had also left thousands of veterans with loyalties to either Antony or Octavian, but none to Lepidus. In their division of the Republic, Octavian and Antony leveraged this against Lepidus, and even accused him of having passed information to Sextus. Whether there was any truth in this accusation is hard to say, and it is just as likely that the rumors were spread by Antony and Octavian to blackmail Lepidus. As a result, Antony was assigned the East, a now unified Gallic province, and the province of Africa Vetus. Octavian was given control of the Hispanic provinces, Sardinia, Africa Nova, and nominally Sicily. Lepidus was given nothing. Instead, it was agreed that Lepidus would be given the African provinces only once it had been proven that he was innocent, a decision that was left to Octavian to decide. As well as dividing the territories, Antony and Octavian now also had to divide control of the legions left over from the Philippi campaign, the 19 they had brought with them, as well as those who had served under the Liberators. Many of these were retired, but 6 legions and 10,000 horsemen were assigned.
How old is Mark Antony compared to Octavian right now?
to Antony, and 5 legions, but 6 legions and 10,000 horsemen were assigned to Antony, and 5 legions and 4,000 horsemen to Octavian. However, the retired legions, as well as many others whose military service was coming to an end, resulted in a huge number of soldiers in need of land to retire to. Prior to the Philippi campaign, Antony and Octavian had promised these soldiers retirement to colonies in some of Italy.
Soldiers of the Roman army were rewarded for their service with land and money. Land either had to be bought from landowners in order to be redistributed, or public land could be distributed. Much of this public land, however, was owned by the wealthy elite. As a result, the far more common method of retiring soldiers was to establish what the Romans called colonies. Effectively, a city would be assigned as becoming one of these colonies. Land would be bought from the landowners of the city and redistributed. So, becoming one of common method, established Romans called colonies. Effectively, a city would be assigned as becoming one of these colonies. Okay.
Italy's best lands, and it
Okay. So is it like a lottery?
was now time for them to fulfill this obligation. Antony went to administer the eastern provinces, while Octavian
is anyone in
returned.
Florida right now? Hope you're being safe. Let's be real. Not many Americans here. Okay, sorry. Just big hurricane down there. Okay, sorry.
And it was now time for them to fulfill this obligation. Antony went to administer the eastern provinces, while Octavian returned to Italy with the task of resettling the veterans. It is likely, though not definite, that Antony had deliberately assigned this task to Octavian, knowing how politically unpopular it would be. If Octavian stuck to their earlier promises, he would certainly infuriate much of the common populace, who would be displaced from their homes. If he tried to find new lands for the veterans rather than those promised, he would risk angering them. And if he tried to take land from the wealthy, he would alienate the senators. Faced with the problem of who to side with, Octavian chose the veterans. His entire political career so far had been built on the army, and he could not risk alienating them and driving more to Antony's side. As such, despite the unpopularity of the decision, Octavian began the process of resettling veterans in the areas previously promised to them. There were initially 28 legions that needed to be resettled, a number that swelled to 34 as Octavian granted more land to try and curry favor with the veterans. Taking into account losses, this may have amounted to more than 150,000 people. Such a large redistribution of land required a colossal amount of money, and Octavian was forced to sell all the remaining property that he had confiscated during the proscriptions, as well as taking vast loans and sums of money from temples. He did try to make concessions to the Senate, avoiding buying too much of their land and judging Lepidus not guilty and assigning him the governorship of Africa to try and keep them sweet. Instead, it was the agrarian middle class of the Republic that suffered the most. Their land was bought at cut-rate prices and redistributed, with entire towns being displaced. In 41 BC, the new consuls came into power, Publius Servilius Esoricus and Lucius Antony, another brother of Mark Antony. Lucius and Mark Antony's wife, Fulvia, saw that if Octavian was seen as the only man redistributing land, his popularity amongst the military would outweigh Antony's. As such, they initially tried to delay the settlements until
Did it backfire?
Antony's. As such, they initially tried to delay the settlements until Antony, who was by this point in Egypt with Cleopatra, returned to Rome. When it became apparent that Octavian would not allow any delay, they instead insisted that Octavian assign a number of Antony's friends as leaders of some of the colonies, thus making it seem like Antony had taken part. With Octavian having been ill for much of Philippi, it was Antony who was considered the hero of the Caesarian party.
Okay. So did his thing backfire? He wanted to send Octavian over there. Octavian ended up, I guess, choosing not as bad of a solution as Antony thought, and now he's trying to get in on it.
And Octavian could not risk angering him. He was forced to relent to Lucius and Fulvia's demands. The situation was becoming an agrarian and social disaster. Many people were being stripped of their livelihood, and near constant war had already deprived Italy of much of its food, and the division of farmlands made the situation all the worse. Compounding this were the navies around Italy. Previously stationed in the Adriatic, after Philippi, Mercus had joined Sextus in Sicily, while Ahenobarbus remained in the Adriatic. Between the navies of Sextus and Ahenobarbus, the Italian peninsula was effectively blockaded. Famine soon began to spread in Rome and other Italian cities, and with the famine came riots and violence. Lucius, with the help of Fulvia, began positioning himself as the champion of the Italian peoples. He argued that, as a triumvir, Octavian could only act with the consent of the other two triumvirs, most importantly Antony. He also pointed out that the Second Triumvirate had initially been established to punish the liberators, and that because this had been achieved, the Triumvirate was now nothing more than tyranny. His party also pointed out that there was plenty of land outside of Italy to settle the veterans in, and that it was unfair for the Italians alone to be bearing the burden. These arguments were well received, and Lucius and Fulvia's popularity rose drastically. Octavian attempted to counter their claims by painting Lucius as being anti-veteran, and claiming that Antony had given him authority to distribute the land as he saw fit. Nevertheless, Italy was starting to become divided between those who supported Octavian, mainly the ex-soldiers, and those that supported Lucius and Fulvia, primarily the aristocracy and Italian farmers. The situation worsened when Lucius claimed that Octavian had sent men to attack Antony's children and himself, prompting Lucius to form a bodyguard from some of Antony's veterans. Whether this truly did happen, or claimed that Octavian. The situation worsened when Lucius claimed that Octavian had sent men to attack Antony's children and himself, prompting Lucius to form a bodyguard from some of Antony's veterans. Whether this truly did happen, or if Lucius fabricated the account, is impossible to say. What can be said with certainty, however, is that the situation was quickly spiraling out of hand, and officers in the army took it upon themselves to try and arbitrate the issue, but with little success. The stakes rose once again when Fulvia went to Lepidus, claiming she feared for her life and those of Antony's children, and both sent letters to Antony telling him the same. Once again, the legions intervened, suggesting that the matter be taken to an official trial. Both Lucius and Octavian.
The fact that the army could twice intercede in the dispute between Octavian and Lucius, and even push the two to come to trial, is an important insight into how powerful the military had become in the Republic. Okay?
Agreed. En route, however, both men sent advance guards ahead of them to scout for any opposition. The two groups met each other on the road, and violence broke out, men on both sides being killed. Octavian pressed on nonetheless, but Lucius refused to go any further, even under the promise that he would be guarded. The negotiations had failed completely. War was inevitable. Lucius's allies began mobilizing. Titus Sextius, a Caesarian and longtime supporter of Mark Antony, retaking the province of Africa, while Ahenobarbus in the Adriatic sailed south and attacked Brundisium, burning a significant part of Octavian's fleet in port. The war had started poorly for Octavian, who immediately summoned a meeting of the Senate. He insisted that there was no bad blood between himself and Mark Antony, and implored them to reason with Lucius. However,
It's amazing how the absence of communication makes everything a million times more difficult. Because think about how all of this would be changed with a simple, not even a phone call, just like a telegraph. It's amazing how much of a game changer instant communication must have been. I mean, so much less possibility of manipulation and lies and deceit when it's just like, yeah, nothing's wrong over here. It seems like I think that's cool.
Men in the Senate, Manius, produced a letter, apparently from Mark Antony, that said that Lucius should and implored them to reason with Lucius. However, one of Fulvia's men in the Senate, Manius, produced a letter, apparently from Mark Antony, that said that Lucius should make war if Marcus Dignatus was attacked. It was a suspiciously vague letter, and the Senate proposed that the matter be put to trial to establish if Antony's dignity had indeed been attacked. Manius filibustered though, and the issue was dropped. Octavian left the city, once again leaving Lepidus in command of its defense. War would have to be the solution. Lucius had 6 legions under his command, and a further 11 that were commanded by Antony's lieutenants, Asinius and Ventidius, around Cisalpine Gaul. Octavian, on the other hand, had 4 under his command and 6 under Salvidienus, located just south of Cisalpine Gaul. Despite his advantageous start, Lucius soon ran into trouble when 2 of his legions in Alba Longa mutinied. Both Lucius and Octavian began a race to Alba, but it was Lucius who got there first, and he was able to bribe the legions to keep them on his side. Octavian was, however, able to attack a reinforcing army, forcing them to make camp around the city of Sentium, which Octavian promptly besieged. Lucius in turn marched on Rome, which was taken without bloodshed thanks to his supporters in the city opening the gates to him, forcing Lepidus to flee to Octavian. While in Rome, Lucius received official approval from the Senate to make war as consul, seemingly legitimizing his cause. Octavian could not, however, leave Rome in his hands, and so, leaving Salvidienus in charge of the siege of Sentium, he took a force back to march on Rome. The city, having suffered through a famine, was not prepared for a siege, and Lucius withdrew his armies, conceding Rome to Octavian without a fight. Salvidienus, meanwhile, had been aggressive, storming Sentium and taking the city. To counter that, Lucius quickly positioned himself between Octavian and Salvidienus, stopping the two from merging. Asinius and Ventidius, meanwhile, were approaching Salvidienus from the north, threatening to encircle him. Seeing the danger, another of Octavian's generals, Agrippa, seized the initiative and took the important stronghold of Sutrium, forcing Lucius to abandon his position to face this new threat. As soon as he did, Salvidienus and Agrippa both marched against him, threatening to pin Lucius between the two.
Super Chad.
Lucius was forced to retreat north, harassed by Octavian's generals. This is the first time in the civil war that Agrippa can be said with certainty to have had a full command, and he was already proving himself to be talented. His maneuver had effectively turned a potentially disastrous situation into an advantage.
I always saw Agrippa and Antony as similar. I'm not saying that they are. I just viewed them as someone kind of learning about. I don't know what that says, but I just I see Agrippa and Octavian as like a mirror of. I'm not saying this is right. Let me be clear. All right, I could be completely off, and these cannot be a good comparison whatsoever. It's just what I've perceived as like Antony and Caesar, Agrippa and Octavian, you know? Like Octavian
Lucius was compelled to make camp around the city of Perusia sometime in late 41 BC, or else be picked apart by Octavian's forces. He was quickly besieged by the armies of Octavian, Agrippa and Salvidienus. With Lucius besieged, Fulvia sent messages to Asinius and Ventidius to march to his aid, but both men seem to have been reluctant to commit. Some sources attribute this to rank insubordination or laziness. However, it is important to remember that these men were loyal to Mark Antony, not his
What island is that in between Corsica and Italy? That's Corsica, right?
brother or wife. Remember that these men were loyal to Mark Antony, not his brother or wife. They took orders from Antony, and Antony had thus far sent no commands. Furthermore, Lucius's cause was not particularly popular with much of the soldiery, and they might have thought it prudent to avoid the possibility of their men defecting to Octavian. Whatever the true reason, the two held back, and when Octavian sent detachments of his army to confront them, they...
Interesting. They didn't want their armies to get close to Octavian because they were afraid some would leave and join him.
The two held back, and when Octavian sent detachments of his army to confront them, they both withdrew, Asinius to Ravenna and Ventidius to Ariminum. Another force, commanded by Plancus, was also en route, but hearing that Asinius and Ventidius had not committed, he too held his forces back in Spoletium. Lucius pulled his men, likely 4 legions, roughly 25,000 men, inside the walls of Perusia. The city was well defended, with strong walls and situated on a high hill. Lucius's men fortified the base of the hill, providing a second line of defenses, while Octavian's forces, constituting as many as 9 legions, approximately 40,000 men, constructed 2 lines of fortifications with ditches, one facing inwards and one outwards, just as Julius Caesar had done at Alesia.
It's amazing seeing sieges, especially the more ancient ones, because there isn't just like the bombard with cannons, of just how much effort they put into like surrounding and fortifying an entire city. And that seems like such an insane task. And yet in the animation, it's just like, oop, these 2 fortresses pop up, these 2 lines. And it's like, how long would that have taken, you know?
The rampant famine had left little food in Italy, and Lucius's men were already running low. They launched a daring night attack during a festival, hoping to cut a way out, but Octavian's men were waiting, and they were beaten back after brutal fighting.
Festival?
The siege, it seemed, would be decided by Antony's generals. After approximately 2 months, Ventidius and Asinius at last broke camp, marching to Lucius's position. Agrippa moved quickly though, taking his force to cut the 2 off and forcing them to encamp in the city of Fulginium, where they united with the force of Plancus. They were less than 20 miles from Lucius and lit large signal fires to alert him of their location, massively raising the morale of Lucius's besieged men. Asinius and Ventidius were, apparently, eager to press on and overrun Agrippa. However, Plancus pointed out that if they tried this, Octavian's men and forcing them to encamp in the city of Fulginium, where they united with the force of Plancus. They were less than 20 miles from Lucius and lit large signal fires to alert him of their location, massively raising the morale of Lucius's besieged men. Asinius and Ventidius were, apparently, eager to press on and overrun Agrippa. However, Plancus pointed out that if they tried this, Octavian's men could quickly march to their position and pin them between 2 armies. A decision had to be made. In Perusia, Lucius's men watched the fires anxiously, waiting for reinforcements. When none came, they assumed that they were simply delayed. They continued to wait until one night there were no more fires. Ventidius, Asinius, and Plancus had made their decision. Lucius would fight alone. Growing more desperate, Lucius ordered another night attack, attacking almost the entire length of Octavian's defenses. The battle continued throughout the night, but ultimately Octavian's men were able to hold the line and force Lucius to retreat. The food shortage in the city was becoming dire. Lucius ordered that no slave be given any food, and most were forced outside between the walls of Lucius and Octavian, where they tried to eat grass to survive. Many of them died here. Lucius's men, in desperation, begged to try a final sally. They gathered all the ladders, siege hooks, and what Appian calls folding towers. Rather than attack across the
Imagine being in that desperate situation and as like a slave where like no one cares if you live or die. It's like, nope, you get no food, go out and eat grass or whatever.
length of the line. Then calls.
Unlike regular siege towers, folding towers were not moved on wheels, but instead were carried to the point of operation in pieces and quickly assembled when needed.
Folding towers. Rather than attack across the length of the line, this time they focused their attacks on a few specific locations, hoping to disperse Octavian's forces as much as possible, while still keeping theirs concentrated enough to make a breach. Lucius's men fought bravely, scaling the walls, and initially seeming to hold the upper hand. Octavian, however, had held his best troops in reserve. Once the men fighting on the walls on both sides were exhausted, Octavian committed his fresh reserves, throwing Lucius's men from the walls and destroying the planks that led from the siege towers to the walls. Lucius's forces were trapped on the ground and under near constant missile fire. He ordered a retreat, but some of his men, driven by desperation and bravery, tried again to scale the wall with ladders, only to be repulsed. Again, Lucius called the retreat, leading his force back inside the walls. The siege, which had lasted for no more than 6 months, was effectively lost. Lucius's men had suffered many losses. Still more were beginning to desert, and it was clear that reinforcements would not be coming. Lucius could do little more than try and preserve the lives of his men. A delegation of peace was sent to Octavian, who replied that he would be lenient to all except his enemies. Lucius and his men surrendered. Octavian spared the soldiers, welcoming many of Antony's old veterans into his ranks. The nobles on Lucius's side were not so lucky, with perhaps as many as 300 equites and a number of senators being executed. The city of Perusia itself was burned, the sources disagreeing on whether this was on Octavian's orders or by accident. Lucius, however, was forgiven, and Octavian soon made him a governor in Iberia, attempting to pit him against his brother.
Interesting.
Lucius's motivation has long been a source of speculation. Some consider him to have been an opportunist who capitalized on the frustration of the agrarian population only because it was politically convenient to do so. Others have a more sympathetic view, suggesting that Lucius truly did believe that Octavian was abusing his position as triumvir and that he fought for the rights of the Italian people. Appian.
A more sympathetic view? I don't see how the first isn't sympathetic.
Suggesting that Lucius truly did believe that Octavian was more sympathetic only because it was politically convenient to do so.
Is that a bad thing? Like, he worded it as if that's like that was a bad thing.
Others have a more using his position as triumvir of this opinion that he fought for the rights of the Italian people. Appian certainly is of this opinion, as can be seen from a speech. Octavian was abusing his position as triumvir and that he fought for the rights of the Italian people. Appian certainly is of this opinion, as can be seen from a speech reportedly given by Lucius and recorded by Appian. I undertook this war against you, not in order to succeed to the leadership by destroying you, but to restore to the country the patrician government which had been subverted by the triumvirate. These are the causes of the war I waged, and these alone. Not for my brother, nor Manius, nor Fulvia, nor the colonization of those who fought at Philippi. You brought this charge against me before the soldiers, shifting the cause of war from yourself to the land distribution, and in this way, chiefly you drew them to your side and overcame me. Whether Lucius truly said this is hard to say, and it is perhaps more likely an invention of Appian designed to capture an idea of what Lucius would have said. Either way, it is clear that Appian truly did consider him a man fighting for principles, not power. Fulvia's
It can sometimes be a little frustrating, oh, it's like, we don't know if he said this, we don't know, but I'm fine with that. I don't want people to tell me, like, this is what he said if we're not sure.
Motivation is even more difficult to establish. As a powerful woman, Fulvia's motivation is even more difficult to establish. As a powerful woman, she is often treated with a degree of hostility by Roman sources, and they attribute her little motivation aside from, quote, womanly jealousy. Though somewhat dismissive, the sources are also clear that she was a highly influential figure, and Dio even made the comment,
she's just jealous she can't participate with the manly things. It's like, I'd be sort of jealous too if...
Also clear that she was a highly influential figure, and Dio...
Oh, you're just jealous. Yeah, no crap, you son of a...
Even made the comment that she was so powerful that she was effectively a consul for 41 BC. Given Antony's highly publicized affair with Cleopatra, perhaps jealousy was a factor. However, it is also possible that Fulvia was simply an ambitious and powerful woman who used her position as wife of a powerful man to further her own interests, in this case, trying to oust Octavian. Powerful
If that's the game, if that's the sort of game you gotta play, it's the game you gotta play, I guess. But
wives would soon become a recurring motif, trying to oust Octavian. Powerful wives would soon become a recurring motif in Roman imperial history, and Fulvia was one of the first to truly exploit her position. Following the conclusion of the war, Antony's lieutenants dispersed. Agrippa was able to convince 2 legions to defect to Octavian, but the majority, along with Asinius, Plancus, and Ventidius, merged with the Ahenobarbus, who was then convinced to side with Antony. Octavian himself began planning to take Gaul.
I have heard the name Ahenobarbus 80 times, 100 times, and I still don't quite know what his deal. Or it seems like with the amount of times he's mentioned, I should know a bit more about him than I do.
Antony, but in a stroke of luck, Octavian himself began planning to take Gaul from Antony. But in a stroke of luck, Antony's governor of Gaul died, allowing Octavian to seize control of the province. Antony's family was also forced to flee Italy, Fulvia taking refuge in Athens, and Antony's mother going to Sextus in Sicily.
So is that the son or something of Pompey who died? Was it here or here? Here? When Caesar was alive?
Antony, in the east, had seemingly been content to allow the situation in Italy to play itself out. It's unlikely that he agreed with his brother's sentiments. Antony was by no means a republican, and as a military man whose power was built on the army, it is improbable that he would have endorsed a position that threatened that relationship. Instead, he had spent much of 41 to 40 BC in Alexandria with Cleopatra, and preparing for a campaign against the Parthians, who had recently started making incursions into Syria. The loss of Gaul, his brother's defeat, and the flight of his family, however, made him look weak, and so he was forced to postpone the invasion and return to Italy.
I want to know how old Antony is right now.
While he was en route, he was met by one of Sextus's advisors, Lucius Scriopnius Liber, who was escorting Antony's mother to safety. In return for this favor, Antony promised to ally with Sextus against their common enemy, Octavian, and to reconcile the two once the war was over. Both of these promises would prove to be short-lived. For now, however, Antony pushed on, landing around Brundisium sometime in mid-40 BC. The city was garrisoned by Octavian's men, and Antony was forced to besiege the city, simultaneously sending word to Sextus to attack wherever he could. Sextus acted swiftly, landing in Sardinia with 4 legions and seizing the island, and sending an invading force to Thurii. Agrippa was able to repel this force, but all-out war, once again, seemed to be being fought in the heart of the Republic. News suddenly reached Antony, though, that his wife Fulvia had died of an illness. This presented an opportunity. There were many in the camps of Octavian and Antony who did not want to fight, having been comrades just 2 years earlier at Philippi, and they implored both men to make peace. Neither man could risk losing the loyalty of their legions, and both were on rocky grounds. Octavian had fought Antony's own brother in Italy itself, while Antony had encouraged Sextus to attack Italy. The hypocrisy of Antony, previously accusing Lepidus of conspiring with Sextus, while now doing it himself, was not lost on anyone. The situation was a mess, and both men were eager to save face. As such, around September of 40 BC, the two made an agreement, the Treaty of Brundisium. The treaty reaffirmed the Second Triumvirate and redistributed territory, Octavian receiving all territories west of Scorda, as well as the right to fight Sextus if a peaceful solution could not be found, and Antony everything to the east, while Lepidus was given Africa. The treaty was cemented by the marriage of Antony to Octavian's sister Octavia. The treaty was cemented by the marriage of Antony to Octavian's sister Octavia. The two men returned to Rome in triumphal fashion to celebrate the marriage. As a sign of their renewed friendship, Antony also revealed to Octavian that he had letters showing that Salvidienus, one of Octavian's oldest friends and a highly talented general, had secretly been planning to desert Octavian. Betrayed, Octavian ordered Salvidienus to Rome, where he was promptly executed.
So that wasn't really even a plan. I'm always assuming like there's an angle, but was that really just oh, hey bro, by the way, he's gonna betray you?
Agrippa would now indisputably be Octavian's right-hand man.
There he is!
The Perusine War ended with the Treaty of Brundisium. However, the endless cycle of war seemed to show no signs of stopping. While Antony had been diverted to Italy, the
So I can't help but notice, okay, the obvious division between East and West, and I'm wondering if this solidified or encouraged or is just a coincidence of a difference between the East and West sides of the empire. So why did they choose? Why did Antony and Octavian choose to split it up where they did? And did a separation between the two that ultimately culminated in a East and West identity start with that split? Or was it already sort of there and that's why they split it where they did? Does that make sense?
Parthian incursion, led in part by Quintus Labienus, had made massive progress, seizing many of the Republic's eastern provinces. We shall cover this Pompeian Parthian invasion and the events surrounding it in the next episode, so make sure to subscribe and press the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible to produce without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links down in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.
Awesome video as always. I was a bit too tired in the beginning, and I wasn't paying attention as much as I wished I did. But it wasn't that bad, or else I would have rewinded more. And but that was a very interesting episode there. Alrighty, boys. Or girls, whatever. Love you guys. Hope you're doing well. Please answer some of my questions. Love to see your comments. And we'd love for you to join the Discord or whatever. Hope you're doing well. If not, chin up. Look at me. Chin up. You'll be good soon. Don't worry. Bye, guys.